Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Virtual Doors. My name is Christine Fleming-McIsaac and I am the Senior Director of Marketing Campaigns at Sadler. I'm so privileged to be joined today by Don Kurre. He has served as a Director of Religious Education and Parishes in the Archdiocese of Indianapolis and Diocese of Grand Island, as well as Supervisor of the North Platte Catholic offices. He is past president of NCCL and was the 2013 recipient of the F. Sadler Dinger Award for Outstanding Leadership and Achievement in Catechetical Ministry. He earned his MA in Religious Studies from Indiana University. Today, he's here to speak about opening virtual doors. Before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. Everyone is on mute to minimize the background noise. If you have a question, though, please type them in the chat box and we will respond to you. That will also be how you ask Don questions and respond to some of his prompts. We are recording this presentation and we'll do our best, as long as technology cooperates, to get this up for you to view again and share with your colleagues. For those of you who have joined us live today and stay through the webinar, you will receive a certificate. It will be sent to you to the email that you registered, as long as you signed in with that email to this webinar. You must be signed in to the webinar to receive the certificate, so if you're with a group, you each really need to be on a computer and signed in to get that certificate. If you are listening to this as a recording, we're sorry, but we can't get you that certificate because we cannot verify your attendance. So again, thank you all so much for joining us. And now, with no further ado, I turn it over to Don Kurre, who will help you open virtual doors.
Well, thank you, Christine. It's really good to be here today. I understand some of the country has some bad and rainy weather. I know it's just gorgeous here in North Platte, Nebraska today. One of the few times that it's been that way in the past few days, so we're really relishing in the sunshine. I do want to welcome you to the virtual doors. I'm really looking forward to this opportunity to spend this time with you and explore the possibilities of going through virtual doors. One of the things I want to make clear as we go through this is that GoToWebinar is the virtual door, and you've already walked into a virtual learning space. So as we go through this today, you can understand that you yourself are already participating in walking through a virtual door. I thought it was important to kind of point that out up front because it gives us a specific reference as we talk about some of the other dimensions of what we're going to explore today. So welcome to the virtual world. Our focus today, as we move through this, is going to be to notice that effective catechists engage their students. And that's kind of a key point of ministry these days. It's how do we engage our students. And today we know that engaging students requires opening virtual doors. In other words, the virtual world is part of what makes and helps our ministry be effective. So during the time that we're together, we're going to explore the doors. We're going to look at some of the benefits that come from taking advantage of virtual doors. We're going to look at the opportunities that they offer by opening virtual doors. And so at the heart, I believe that this webinar is about changing our thinking about the who, when, and where of our ministry. And I'll say more about that as we go along. But I think if you look at this in terms of your own ministry and say, you know, how can I think about the who, the when, and the where of my ministry? And we'll explore that just a little bit more today. As we start, I do want to share a disclaimer because I think it's important for us in catechetical ministry, evangelization, to be sure that we review and are aware of any diocesan or parish policies that exist with regard to technology and social media. It's important to be aware of those up front because I think that way we're responsible both to our parishes and our dioceses, that we're doing what we can to protect not only the adults, but the youth and children that we're working with. So you need to be aware of those up front, I think. And as we talk about this today, I'm going to talk about some ways that we can ensure to comply with those policies, because sometimes people get a little fearful of, using the technology. What are the dangers that we need to be aware of? And so as we're talking today, I'll point out a few things that can be, that you can be aware of to take advantage of the technology. So first of all, I'd like to get to know a little bit more about you, and I have a few questions. If you type them in the question box there, it'll help us get a sense of who you are and can adjust some of the things I might say today. So first, I'd like to know a little bit about what hardware you use, not only what hardware you're on today, but do you use a tablet, a smartphone, do you use a laptop? If you'd kind of highlight what of those you use. I'd also be interested in what apps you use for your ministry, not necessarily things like, things like Word but other software and apps that you use. What's your favorite app as your catechetical ministry? If you'd share those. And then what hardware do your students use? I think it's important as we look at virtual doors to understand the hardware that your students are using, so if you'd share a little bit about that. And there again, what apps do your students use? So if you could kind of share that with us, we'll get a sense of that here in just a minute. I'd also like to know if there's any specific fears that you bring as we begin this journey through virtual doors. What's one fear that you bring, perhaps, as you do this? And then if there's a question that you have up front that you'd like to make sure that we address as we move through this time that we're together, take a minute and jot that down. So, Christine, anytime you have a sense of what the tools are and what the questions or fears are, if you'd let us know those.
Definitely, Don. It looks like there is a wide range of iPads, iPhones. We have both laptop and computers and smartphones. So it looks like we have a real mix when it comes to devices. But I saw lots of interesting answers with apps and things like that, such as we have YouTube. It looks like either Glow Bible or Go Bible. We have video editing, online web creation, such as WordPress, Weebly, and SurveyMonkey. MobiMax, sorry. Smartboards, too, are coming up a lot.
Okay.
As a DRE, What's Up for communications. Oh, the Sadler website. Thank you very much. We like to see that. And Susan, I'll put a name with it to know that I'm not plugging it. We have Formed, which is a Catholic Netflix, and YouTube. Some concerns are cost of computers. And Chris, yes, you are to type your answers where you type that question. We do have social media apps from someone, Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, and Twitter. And I think that one of the scared things, we have people saying apps for students, question marks. Sacred Space and Days of Mercy, some other things. Okay, fears. That I don't have time to keep up with all the new technology, though I try like crazy. Limited time. Time seems to be a big concern. How to engage older catechists in the virtual world. That's actually been echoed a couple times. And where can I find Catholic resources that aren't too far to the right or to the left, and that look forward as theology develops? Another fear is that we're losing the relational ministry or inappropriate pop-up ads and keeping current, which we kind of already saw. Oh, Carol also likes the Sadler website. Tech fails is another fear as well. And it seems there's actually quite a few people, too, that maybe are struggling with technology, don't have it, or have very little, and I'm guessing they're here to learn more and open a new door to the virtual world.
Okay.
And sound good?
Sounds good.
Great.
Okay. Thank you, Christine. I think that gives me a good sense of what people bring, and I think some of those questions and fears that have been raised we'll talk about as we move through. So I look forward to that. So thank you for sharing that with us, and we'll move on a little bit more. And if you have a question and want to type it in the question box there a little bit later here as we move through the session, Christine will come back again and share some of the questions with us so that we can address those questions more specifically again as we move through. So I want to a simple definition of virtual, as you may all already know, is it's very close to being something which, without actually being it or existing or occurring on computers or on the internet. So I think you probably understood when you signed up and registered for this webinar that when we were talking about doors, we were talking about a metaphor for a door. A virtual door allows us to move in and pass into something else. Actually, I was going to try to look for an image when I was thinking about that. I thought of the wardrobe in The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe in C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that's kind of a virtual door in the sense that it takes you from one place to another, and that's in many ways what we're going to talk about here today. I want to talk about some of the shifts that I think we need to see and understand as we talk about virtual doors and how to be effective in our ministry today. One of the shifts is from education to learning. And I think that's a really important thing. Education is what we do as catechists. It's what teachers do. We educate. It's the education. What we're focusing on, the shift today, is to learning. And learning is about what students do, what participants do. So I think when we're thinking of virtual doors, what we're trying to do is to figure out ways that we can help our students, the people who are participating in our programs, how we can help them learn very effectively. And I know throughout all the time, you know, the question was, you know, we wanted our students and the children and the adults in our programs, we wanted them to learn. The question, I think, the shift that's happening today is we're going to put more emphasis on the learning, and especially in what we look at in terms of the virtual world. We're looking from consumption of information to participatory learning, and I think that's a very important shift to understand as well. We're not consuming information, and sometimes that's often what happens is we're setting the participants in our programs up for consuming information. And on one level, that's part of what this webinar is based a lot on, is the consumption of the information that I have and I'm sharing with you. So we have a real experience of that, because a lot of the educational stuff that we do does revolve around consumption and consuming information rather than participatory learning. In other words, if I'm going to teach you how to tie your shoes, for example, one of the best ways is to tie your shoes. If I want to teach you about rituals, the best way to do that on many levels is to actually get involved in rituals, to participate in that. So participating, getting the students and the participants actually doing. The other thing we're moving is from institutions to network. One of the shifts, you know, we thought about the parish, the local, rather than, and what the shift is to begin to think of the networks. What are the networks of learning groups, the networks of resources, the networks of people, and as human beings, we are very well networked and connected. And so as we broaden our thinking, when we think about using virtual doors and going through virtual doors, we go from institutions to that larger focus, perhaps, of networks. And I think that's an important shift to get a sense of as well. If you want more information about the shifts that I've just kind of highlighted here today, because I want to really spend more time on the doors themselves than on some of the backgrounds. But if you're really interested in doing some more reading about this, I highly recommend John Roberto's book, Reimagining Faith Formation in the 21st Century. The information I've taken here comes from his book on page 25, so I would just highlight that. Towards the end of the webinar, I have the links there for you to find John and some of the other resources that he has available. So those are kind of the shifts that are involved in setting up the use and the advantages that we have when we use virtual doors. I think it's important to ask the question, why virtual? And I think there's a number of reasons to focus on that. But the first thing I want to say is we ask the question, what do you want to achieve? That's the important question. When you're working with your students or the people in your programs, what do you want them to achieve? That's the crucial question. The question isn't what technology are we going to use. The question is what to achieve. And when we say what do we want to achieve, that in itself will make visible, I often find, the technology that will help us accomplish that goal. So when I talk about this, I think it's important to understand that. There are some tools that we'll talk about today, but the important issue is what do I want to accomplish? For one reason why virtual, that's where people are. If you look at some of the statistics around, people's use of iPhones and Android phones and tablets and those kind of mobile devices with computers and stuff, people are in the virtual world a lot of the time, a lot of their life. So it's where people are. And I find if we're not where they are, then they're not aware of us. It's harder to interact with them. So by going where they are, we have opportunities that we wouldn't have if we didn't do that. The other thing is it broadens the possibility of engagement because through virtual doors we can access grandparents, we can access godparents. It would be really neat to have our students, our participants interacting with their godparents. The Altar Society, perhaps, how do we get them involved? The Saturday morning Bible study group, how are they interacting with our students? What are the possibilities there? So going through virtual doors broadens the possibilities of engagement with our students and with the other people who are in our community. And that is a piece of the thing that I talked about earlier in terms of networks. What are the networks and how do we connect ourselves and our participants with those networks? Then, as I say, take advantage of the networks, because as you look at your own environment, your own parish, your own community, your own state, there are all kinds of possible networks there that we can access and use. And so I think that's important to understand that that's part of the answer to why virtual. Also, why virtual is broaden the potential of support. One of the things I think is important in our world and our community today is to do as much as we can about support. I know as I was growing up, I usually went out the door, 8 o'clock in the morning, and I didn't come home until Mom rang the big bell. At lunch, I came home and ate lunch, but there was a safety in that Mom knew that the eyes of the neighborhood we lived in were on me. And if I was doing something wrong, something that I shouldn't have been doing, if I got hurt, that there was support there, and we were confident in that support. I could go into any of my friends' homes. There was a sense of that community, that support there, and sometimes today that sense of support has shrunk in many ways. We perhaps don't feel the same security in our own neighborhoods, but when you talk about it in terms of, my religious faith, the support that I got was from that community as well. They knew I was Catholic. They didn't serve me meat on Fridays when we were at their house, and those kinds of things. So that support is broadened through the virtual world when perhaps it's been reduced in the real world. And whether it should have been or not is another question, but there's some reality there. More resources. When you walk through the virtual doors, as we'll talk a little bit about that today, the resources just explode. There are so many, and some of you have already mentioned some of those as you talked about what software and things that you're using. There's so many resources. I remember, when I first came to the Diocese of Grand Island, each day we sent out a huge amount of videos or of 16 millimeter movies, film strips. We just sent out there was a limited supply of those kinds of resources. Now it's almost unlimited. It's just phenomenal. And so when you go through a virtual door, the amount of resources that you have access to is just phenomenal. And we can look at how we use those and access those, because like somebody said, I don't have enough time. Where do I get the time to deal with all of this resources? Sometimes, it just feels so overwhelming. You look at the list of possibilities and just choose none of them because there's too many. So we'll look at some ways to do that. But I think in the case of faith formation and catechesis, the abundance of resources is extremely important and helpful. As somebody said, how do you know which are the good resources and are the better resources to use? Where are they coming from? Those kinds of things. So we'll look at that just a bit too. So, and probably the other thing why virtual is because we can adapt learning to each person. And you'll know when I first started talking, I said that, part of the thing was to engage your students. And one of the best ways to engage your students and the people you're working with is by adapting the learning to that person. How do we engage them, and how do we adapt what we're doing as a catechist to that person and make it more meaningful and more engaging? And I think, that as we look at this, when we adapt it to the participant is engaged and learns more effectively. The learning is internalized, and that's what I think we're about in terms of as people become disciples. How do they internalize what we're doing and what we're learning, and then begin to move that forward. I hope some of that's making sense. We're going to take a break here in a minute to look at questions. So if you have some questions about any of this, we'll look at those as we go here in just a minute. I want to look at, just to mention the shape. What we're moving from is from, say, 27 classes a session for 45 to 60 minutes in the church basement. We're moving from that to formation that's 24/7, 365, anywhere, anytime. And I think that often is a huge mental shift that we need to make. In other words, we're moving from the very specific place and time where formation happens to a much larger and I'm a little reluctant to say infinite possibilities in terms of where the learning can happen. And so some of that calls us as catechetical ministers to relax a little bit and enable our the people who are our students and participating with us to allow them to access some of this stuff that's available 24/7, 365. And you know that some of the interesting part of that is that, you know, if we're not there, then they're accessing other things 24/7, 365. So they're already in that environment. So what I'm proposing here is that we join that environment if we haven't already done it. And so an example that I just recently participated in, I happen to be a bass player in an Irish band here in North Platte. And recently Scott from Scott's Bass Lessons, it's an online academy with bass lessons. He created the Scott's Bass Lessons Live on April 9th and 10th. He hosted Scott's Bass Lessons Live. It was roughly 14 hours of bass instruction, and one of the phenomenal pieces of that was there were 29,000 bass players from around the world that participated in this event. The live event included some of the best bassists in the world, and it was all absolutely fun. So here you have, you know, Scott from Scott's Bass Lessons. Scott lives in England. So there were people from England to Japan to Australia, the United States, or as I said, there were people from all over the world. So there was some collaboration and coordination with, you know, the time. What time frame are you in that these live lessons are going to be available? So you could work on the live lessons. Then, as with what Sadler is doing with this webinar, those things were also available. But I think for me, one of the reasons why I wanted to put this slide up and do this was because I think it's phenomenal. Here you have 29,000 people coming together and learning and talking about playing the bass. You know, and I'm sure there's other environments that's happening at. Similar things are happening, but it's one of the really dynamic things, that one of the opportunities that oftentimes you know, we just don't really access. What if those 29,000 people were connected for faith formation over a weekend? You know, we bring them to, you know, Kansas City or Omaha for an event, or to Lincoln or to LA or wherever it is. What if they were from all over the world and they're 29,000? What could the youth or the adults of my community, how would they benefit? How would their faith grow by interacting with people from around the world in that way? I just think it's phenomenal as we do this. So I want to take just a little break here and say, Christine, are there any questions that are coming up that we need to address at this point?
I think there are questions that you might be addressing as we move forward. A big question is, how can we engage younger children, so such as those in kindergarten or pre-K, especially considering their minds are still in development. One of the other things that many people ask for is the app. So I think both what people suggested here, as well as, you know, your own recommendations. So that would be a follow-up for us we can discuss. Someone else asked, how do I engage 13 to 17-year-olds on the under end of the spectrum, 13 and 14-year-olds that don't want to be in religious education classes? He has tried Jeopardy games and music, but he says he's over 50 and not hip, so I'm not in tune with today's music options. And then one more, how do we translate all this wonderful information to use in our classroom and parishes? She loves the idea that all these people can connect, but how do we make it safe for younger students and maybe even bring in families to participate? So I'm sure you're going to be addressing some of those things next.
Okay, cool, yes. Well, thank you all for those questions, and we will address those as we move through. So as we move through to kind of, and some of these came up in some of the earlier fears, I want to look at some of the things to consider as we go through. So the first kind of advice I would say is to start slow, one door at a time. Sometimes perhaps like you might be feeling, I'm gonna put a lot of stuff out there, and you're gonna say, where do I start? I'm not sure where to start, but I'm going to recommend that, you pick one thing, one door at a time. Just pick one door and walk through it. Because what I found, and what I think you will find, is that once you start, it goes on itself. In other words, walking through one door leads to another door, and the second door that you encounter is going to be easier to go through. The resource will be easier to use because you went through the first door. So I'm going to say just relax and start slow. The second piece there that I would consider is give the space time to bloom. A lot of times what happens is we try it for 2 weeks and we say, well, this doesn't work. I'm gonna not do that anymore. And that's, it's interesting. We're thinking here in North Platte about our garden, and I think of, you plant a green pepper plant, and it seems like it sits there for 2 weeks and doesn't do a thing, and so you pull it up to check the roots to see if the roots are still good. But you've killed the plant. So what you need to do is just give it some time to bloom. With patience, it develops over time, and some of this has to be that our participants, our students, like the one question, how do I deal with the students who don't want to be there? Sometimes they're not used to this different approach. They're not used to walking through the doors in the religious environment that they're walking through in other parts of their life. And as you give it time to bloom, they'll become more accustomed to that. The next thing and goes along with the blooming is to be consistent. And for example, getting a little ahead of myself, but if you say you're going to post something on the class's website every week, then post something on the website every week. That being consistent, whatever you commit to, be consistent in committing to it. And what I'll say is that, and I'll give you some insights in terms of, it's not all about you. I'm not expecting you to do all of this. Think of the conductor of the orchestra. In other words, how do you conduct the pieces that are going to be available? How do you conduct those in a way that provides an environment where your students and participants begin to learn? So that consistency is really important. Reward the behavior you want. I often see that, when I was a catechist, it's really easy to reward the behavior that you don't want with your attention. If you set up a process to follow, reward the students and the participants who follow the process and do it. You want to reward the behavior you want by acknowledging it, by sending the side note or whatever it is that you want to do. You want to reward that behavior that you want. That's important. The next one goes along with a little bit with the start slow. That is to take advantage of the tools you have. If you already use Twitter, my proposals are not necessarily that you stop using Twitter, but that you figure out how Twitter works as a door to this larger virtual world. A lot of times we have the tools already in our toolbox, and the thing is to say, okay, for the next 2 months, I'm going to figure out how to effectively use this tool for my formation, and that will then be able to take you some additional steps. It's not going to happen overnight, and I think that's one of the things where we have to pray for patience. And I would remind you again to be aware of the diocesan and parish policies, because those are important to stick with. Then the other thing I would say, kind of feeding back into what I've said earlier, is choose one thing and go forward. The worst thing that we can do at this point, I think, is to not do anything. And in this context, the virtual doors that we have, in my perspective, there is no wrong door. There are some doors that may be more effective and more helpful. There may be some doors that are less helpful, but choose one and go with it. And, you know, if somebody says, well, that's a horrible thing, thank them for their opinion and move forward, because you know, that's going to help us in the long run. Action in this regard is what's going to be important. I hope that makes some sense in terms of as you move into this in the virtual world, to these things to keep in mind as you go in. You don't have to change it all. You don't have to do it all. You don't have to change it all. So I think that's extremely important to remember. One of the things as you go, because somebody answered, how do I have the time? When we have access to virtual doors, it opens up another whole world in terms of who we invite into our process. We invite parents, grandparents, and I just listed here on the screen a number of possible places, people that you could invite into your class, into your environment, into your space. You know, think about it. You know, when was the last time that the bishop of your diocese interacted with your students? And it's fascinating when that, you know, to have the bishop in your class is a possibility. It can be so real. And to have the bishop interact with your students and participants in a way that would just really enrich, you know, to talk to some of the religious women at a mother house close by, or even in some other state, you know, is some neat things to think about. So what I'm encouraging you to do, or one of the virtual doors does, is it opens the people who are there, you know. There's no reason not to invite anybody, you know, to say, come on in, I want you to come into my class and do this. And we're coming up on the point where we'll begin to talk about that, but I wanted to name some of those people to invite, and those organizations and those networks to invite in, you know, because every Bible study group, and, you know, I would be brave and say, yes, every Bible study group, you know, has somebody there who has access to the technology that we need. So I want to look at the doors now. Let's look a little bit at the doors. And I picked a few. I picked 6 doors. That doesn't mean that there aren't others. Some of them you've named, and some of them that I've chosen are not some of the typical ones. Like one of the doors I chose for our time today is not Facebook, because people are familiar with Facebook, and if we want to talk about Facebook and some of the questions, I'm happy to do that. But I think there are some other tools that provide us with some possibilities that perhaps match better with some of our diocesan policies, and that match better with some of the goals that we have short-term and long-term. So what am I saying are the doors? The first door is Google Hangouts. I'm going to talk a little bit about Google Hangouts because I think that's one of the effective doors. The other door is Google Docs. We'll talk a little bit about that as we move through too. I think that's one of the very valuable doors for our catechetical ministry. I'm going to talk about Periscope. I don't know if you're familiar with Periscope, but it's a real fascinating little resource that I think you might find very, very helpful. And I was thinking of Periscope when I was thinking of inviting the bishop. But anyway, I'm going to talk about Flipboard. Flipboard's another resource that I think you might find helpful in terms of opening virtual doors. We're going to talk a little bit about WordPress or Weebly. Both of these have a free resource out there. There's some others, Wix. I find WordPress myself most usable. I know some other people find Weebly most usable, so I listed those two. And I'm going to talk a bit about Evernote. Evernote is one of the notebook resources that can be very helpful, and we'll talk about it. So those are the 6 doors that I want to reflect on with you for a little while to say, okay, how do we use the doors as we move through? So Google Hangouts. What I'm talking about here is Google Hangouts is a virtual class or formation space. Oftentimes we think of just that classroom that's in the church basement many times, or wherever it is in the new hall. But Google Hangouts provides us with some access to other resources, and it's basically relatively easy to use. Can do both voice, audio, and video if you want, so that there are some real neat resources there. I think of, Hangouts, and, Hangouts, one of the things that I looked at when I looked at the resources, the doors that I was going to talk about here, was that they're cross-platform. In other words, you can get on Google Hangouts. Google's done a really neat thing. You don't need a Google account anymore to get out and use Hangouts. You can invite people. So, for example, one of the things, I have a sister that lives in Atlanta. I have a brother in Springfield, Missouri. I have another brother in Phoenix, Arizona, and I live in North Platte, Nebraska. And we meet about quarterly. We get on Google Hangouts and have about an hour and a half conversation that keeps us connected as a family, as siblings. And so, if you looked at that in terms of, your class with the class in some other part of your diocese, on the third session of every month, you join with some Google Hangout and have a conversation with them. The other thing that Google Hangouts, that if you remember just a minute ago, I talked about who do you invite. In other words, if you get your set up a Google Hangout, so if you're talking about the sacrament of reconciliation, for example, so you find the woman or man who's, a senior citizen and been around in your community for a long time, you set them up with a Google Hangout and you have them talk to your students about what their experience of reconciliation was. The students can ask questions back and forth. You find that virtual space. It also gives you the opportunity to set up some dynamics with your students, and one of the things, if you're teaching like working with 5th graders and you're working on sacraments, it'd be really kind of cool to offer a Google Hangout, say on Sunday evening for a half an hour. Billy is going to provide a Google Hangout to whoever the parish wants to join and learn about the sacraments that he's learned about. It provides them the opportunity to be the facilitator of a conversation around sacraments, and allows them to be share the wisdom and knowledge. And you may have had an experience similar to what I've had. Oftentimes, if we have to teach something, we learn it better than we do when we're on the other side of the fence. So the Google Hangouts lets us set up those, those little small group kind of things around our parish that we might not have access to because people don't come out. People want to stay home, and or they got stuck in a big box store and the checkout line and need a 15-minute session in a Google Hangout would be really cool. So the other piece of that is what I might often, it's a little with Google Hangouts is you record them. So if you record your class, or at least your presentation, post it online, you have a podcast And then what I like to do is invite my students in to give a summary. And I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit with Google Docs here, but to make your class available online through a podcast, kind of putting a recording of your class online. It's really simple to do. You just put your iPhone on the desk, record what you're doing, turn it into an MP3, load it up on your website, and away you go. So, and in many ways, it's as simple as that. So Google Hangouts, I think, is a resource that really, it's one of those doors that we go through and take advantage of, because it both enlarges our class space, but also gives us the time to hang out with other people. I think, changing a little bit, Google Docs is a valuable resource for a variety of reasons. It provides us with an opportunity to interact with a resource. For example, and I drew up a little using Google Docs, for example, before you do your class, if you created a little 3-point summary, in this class we talked about, the Our Father, the 7 elements of the Our Father, and how Our Father fits into our tradition. You post the 3 summaries on a Google Doc. You invite students to add 2 things that they learned from their class to the document. You invite them to ask a question, so you give them access to the document. They post it and respond. And then questions that they raise, other students who access the document could answer, or, you invite, somebody from your altar society who loves to work with children and be a mentor to access that document and share that information with the students. So it's one of the ways that things like Google Docs, in their ability to collaborate with those documents, it gives you that ability. So students from anywhere, they're in some of our rural communities where they have an hour and a half ride on the bus home at night, they sit there with their phone and respond to your question and share with fellow students. And the dynamic of Google Docs is that not only the people that you invite, that is your students, or the moderator that you encourage to come in, the parents perhaps, would have access to the document. So it's not like we're opening this up to the whole world to see, but it's only this little cluster, or I would see setting up you've got the red group and the green group, and they each have access to a different document, and they share around that document, so you have a smaller group. So things like that expand, expand the dynamics of what you're doing. You get different questions from your students, and you say, yeah, but they'll never go there. Maybe not today, but that's what I said in terms of being consistent. If I do this, say every 2 weeks, we're going to have this opportunity where you can go in and reflect on this. And then that happens every 2 weeks. And you give a little summary and highlight, maybe a little note of thanks to the students that participated. You give a $10,000 candy bar to the person who was on the most. Some things like that to reward those behaviors. Another question, if you're in one of the grades that's doing scripture, it'd be really interesting to set up a Google Doc around Father's homily. What did you learn from the homily, and how are you going to implement what you learned? And then we bring that to class and say, okay, kind of a service project flows out of what Father's been saying in his homily over the last 3 weeks. I mean, that's just phenomenal opportunity. And you say, well, everybody doesn't come. Well, so, you get 2 or 3, 5, and Billy comes, and next week he said, this was really cool, and so he brings 2 of his friends. And the same thing happens with Susie, and so you get that dynamic going on. So I think that's just a really cool possibility around Google Docs, where what it does is it takes the conversation that was started in the class and expands it. So if you want to do this, you look at your list of people to invite, and lo and behold, I know that on Sundays we have a group of people that take communion to shut-ins. And I know, because I talked to the person who's doing the shut-in ministry, I talked to them and I found out that Mrs. McGillicuddy is really active on the computer with her grandkids. So I go over and visit with Miss McGillicuddy, which does, visit the people, bring your community to them. And I said, here's what I got for you. I got this program. I'm going to give you 3 points. I'd like you to post them on this document. Here's how you do it. You show her real briefly. And then I want you to watch the discussion that goes on with the kids. And I want you to do this every week. Can you do that for us? And she says, yeah, I'll do that. Because there's that dynamic, that human contact that is significant for people. And one of the constraints I often hear with people is that well, the face-to-face is so really important. Yeah, I understand that. The dynamic is, let's use the face-to-face time for stuff that requires face-to-face time. Answering those questions doesn't necessarily require face-to-face time, but builds a connection and builds an internal energy around what the student is interested in, so that when you come to the face-to-face time, you can use it most effectively. The fact that we're going to read, or, we can do the reading at home, we can do the reading online, or those kinds of things, and I think that makes it really important. The other thing, and earlier I talked about the engagement. Maybe one of the docs that you post, you have posted, is like one of the students in your class. Maybe Billy's always asking about something that, or in the women's Bible study, they're always asking about these words. Then enable one of those people to post the discussion on Google Docs, and then you get that kind of creation. And so it doesn't have to always be you as the catechist. Periscope. Periscope is a part of the Twitter empire, and if you're not familiar with it, what it does is it allows you to live broadcast. You do need a Twitter account to use it on both ends, but for example, one of the things that was really neat, I thought, when there were some of those, and I think even just recently, when those was some really bad weather in Texas, some of the other southern states, the Weather Channel would come on Periscope and give some announcements. And so that's really, I think it's really clear. They give some announcements, they go over the charts. So, there's another guy who does, he does fountain pens. So he does a little Periscope thing around fountain pens, cleaning them and putting new ink in them. And, so I say, here we got a Periscope, connect up with the bishop or connect up with your Bible study group, however you want to do that. But Periscope provides you with an opportunity to do a live broadcast to whoever is in your class and has that Twitter account. So you can invite those people that you want to participate. They have the opportunity to type in some comments so you can question, but it's only a one-way live in terms of one-way vocal and verbal and visual. So that it would be you talking to whoever joins your broadcast. But it's a really neat little effort. I could see a variety of things. I know one of our TV stations in town does a broadcast on what's going on in the morning as they get ready for the morning show. It's a lot of curling their hair and funny concepts and those kinds of things, funny jokes. But the point is that you could see what's going on, and I could see some ways that catechists could use those in terms of following a class on the rituals. You might do a follow-up presentation or have Billy do a story of, how is it that we use ashes on Ash Wednesday, and where did those ashes come from? Billy could do that, and that's more engaging. So Periscope's a neat little thing. You might try it. All of these tools, there's no charge to using them. So the other one I want to talk about was Flipboard. Flipboard is kind of a magazine style of media, and what I see it doing here would be to expand it in terms of your class. It would be to expand your textbook. In other words, whenever you find an article that you're reading, that you could put it in the Flipboard, and then students could access it because they can join your board. And there again, you can do it for your class, and it just provides a really great way to interact with some of your students. For example, here's the Sadler webinar that I created, my spirituality and spiritual life of my students, where I begin to collect articles. If you're interested in that magazine, if you want to email me, I'd be happy to share that with you. And I know that Christine will put my email address in the notes there, which is donk05@gmail.com. donk05@gmail.com. But one of the things that it enables us to do, I think, is expand the reading material that's available to our students. The thing that I think is also interesting, if your students come across something that's interesting, they could share it back with their other students too, and you build the magazine of the class. I think somebody asked, how do you do these with younger children? I think things like Periscope would be wonderful. That there's a variety of ways that you could use that with them. I think that would be really cool too. I think you could also, there's a variety of ways you could use Flipboard with younger students. Our granddaughter, who's about to be 2, it's just amazing how she already has access, using her parents' phones to these kinds of things. So I think that our younger students are going to have access to the material as well, and so we can make those kinds of things available to them, as we flip in some video from that we've connected off the web and put it into our magazine. I just wanted to mention, highlight here, wanted to highlight WordPress and Weebly. I think it would be just really important, these two tools as a way of sharing information more so. This is more information sharing with your students and your families. One of the things I think it's important to do is to make information available to people, and through resources like WordPress or Weebly, both of which enable you to make a website. You could do, Holy Spirit, 5th grade religious ed, at weebly.com. And so there's some place to access, some place where you can have conversations if you want to include comments, but there's some way that, to highlight, what's going on in your class. And all age levels would be able to do that as well. I think that's a really cool thing. Moving on a little bit to Evernote. If you're not familiar with Evernote, Evernote's a free kind of a notebook program, but what I like for is you can collect all kinds of resources all over the web and your notes, and you could put your class outline on there, you could put whatever you're doing, you could entertain questions, those kinds of things. That's one of the neat things about Evernote, is it gives you a little bit more control over how you organize and the collaboration that you want to have with some of your participants. But I see that as a virtual door in terms of sharing information and engaging students. One of the things that I'd want to do is, in the context of whatever my class is, the door I would like to help students go through is the door to organize their learning and share it again. In other words, here's what I learned about this sacrament or this theologian or this concept, and I'm sharing it out with the people in my community. You know, the link should be in your bulletin or wherever, your parish website, and so that the rest of the parish can be engaged in that dynamic. Why not have your 5th grade class sharing information about the sacraments with the RCIA class that's coming up? You know, here's what we learned today. What are you learning? You know, here's the dynamic. Get some of the back and forth. So Evernote allows you that opportunity to do that. So that's one of the areas. I hope I'm making some sense with people out there. The other couple of other things I want to just highlight because I think they're important doors. Somebody mentioned YouTube. I think that's start your own YouTube channel, just like you're going to do your own website. You know, you all got a camera in your phone, assuming that at least 90% of the people on this webinar, if not everybody, has access to that a phone. Make a YouTube, put it on your YouTube channel. And then, you know, that would be really cool. Have your 2nd graders who are First Communion, you know, learning what they're doing, put it on a YouTube channel and let the kindergartners interact with it as well. There's some really neat stuff, possibilities there on YouTube. And YouTube, if you do, it's number 2 search engine is YouTube. People do more searches on YouTube than almost anything else. So there's a variety of resources there. The Sadlier Online, and I highlight Sadlier, one, because they're sponsoring this webinar, but they're doing some really aggressive and interesting things. Their new sacraments program is really looks pretty dynamic and interesting in terms of the way it incorporates the use of technology and the virtual doors there. So with Sadlier, if you're using some other publisher, they have online materials and resources that you can access as well. Edutopia is another resource where you can find all kinds of wonderful things. If you're not familiar, again, with TED Talks, I would encourage you to become familiar. TED Talks is just a phenomenal resource as you move through. So those are some of the resources. And I know somebody earlier asked, well, yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there, so what do I do? How do I decide which is the good stuff and which is not, which is too far right or too far left, or those kinds of things? One of the things I would point you to is curating faith formation. It's a service of Lifelong Faith Associates connected with John Roberto, but it's a resource that does exactly what we're talking about here. It helps you curate the resources that are out there that are available, and helps you get a sense of, you know, are you looking specifically for a Bible study? Somebody's already looked at these and said this is going to be good stuff. So as you can see at the top of the slide, there's Bible, learning, prayer, service, worship, family, all kinds of possible resources, interaction. John has done a really, really good job of curating just an overwhelming number of resources that post both to dioceses and to parishes and publishers and all kinds of resources. So I highly recommend you take a look at that. The URL is right there, and that's a virtual door that I would encourage you to walk through. You know, even if that's your first step, to say, you know, what do I want to do here? Take a look at some of the things that are available for the dynamics. In other words, this isn't what I'm trying to communicate here, is that it's not only about going from sharing information out, but it's saying, you know, how are you going to get involved with this material? Once once you look at this, then how are you going to take it forward to the students, and how are they going to use it and share it with other people as well? Some of the things that we've talked about: Google.com, Periscope is Periscope TV, Flipboard, WordPress, Weebly, Evernote. Some of those are pretty, you may already be familiar with in terms of the URLs. We talked about some more doors. There's the YouTube Utopia, Sadlier, Lifelong Faith. And then I just put Catholic publishers down there because, if the textbook series that you're using, they do have some resources out there for you as well. So, Christine, do we have any questions, or where are we?
We do have some questions. Okay, let's see. One of the things was, what do you suggest for catechist formation? So I guess more professional learning.
I think that the interesting thing about catechist formation it includes many of the doors we've already been talking about. In other words, I would set up a monthly or bi-weekly hangout with other catechists from around your diocese. Put out the word that we're going to do this and interact through something like Hangout. I think that creating a flipboard for catechists of exciting and energizing resources that you curated. In other words, if you found a good video for your kindergarten class, put it on your flipboard that other people can access as well. Those kinds of resources are really available. So I think that, the more you interact with each other in terms of those resources, the better they are. But I would suggest using these as well. So is there one resource out there that I would say, you need to go to? It's like anything else. The much of the point is, what are you going to create and use to make that happen? I know some of the stories I put in my flipboard for this webinar are, teaching sites that have some information that would be helpful for catechists. Other people that I've talked to use Twitter for catechist formation, because there's some, people say I've used this and people, and there's dialogue and that kind of thing. So I think those interactive resources are really helpful for people. I don't know if that's as helpful or not, but
they can ask a follow-up question too. Norma asks, can I book a lesson one day and another day I can show a video? How do I connect them?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
I think she's looking to integrate video, and she's thinking one day she would do a book lesson and another day do a video, and the concern, I guess, is connecting them. I know how we dealt with that in the New Sacrament program because the video is integrated into the lesson, but I guess when that's not available, I guess she's looking for tips on how to do that better.
See, what I would say there is that the question of what are the students learning? So when they're learning, when the textbook is the resource out of which they're learning, say we're learning about sacraments, we're learning about the anointing of the sick. So, today we're going to do some reflection on that from the textbook. Next week we're going to use a video, or we're going to use a YouTube item of a person reflecting on their experience of being present when someone was anointed. That's how, in other words, I think the connection of those two tools is through the goal that you're set for what the students are doing. So, in that case, I may even, as I would say, the video that we're going to use is online, and I'd like you to watch it and, identify 3 things that you had questions about, and 3 things that you thought were just really interesting, and share those, and that'll be the heart of our discussion when we come together on Sunday. That's how I would do it.
Great, thanks. One of the concerns, and it's come up a few times, was how do we handle safe environment requirements? And I think particularly when you go kind of outside some of these more open channels like Twitter and Periscope, I was wondering, is there any way to have like a closed group in Periscope, and then maybe some of the other doors, so that it is a more safe environment?
I think the key on that is that list I showed about who to invite. In other words, I think that the safe environment issues are often, the one-on-one situations where the person, the adult perhaps, is with the children or even other young people. So the point is that all of these things are open in the sense of when I have Google Groups, the families, the parents know about that, but one of the people that I have there with me is one of the people from this other group. I always invite somebody else. So there's always at least 2 of us. And it may be 2 people who've agreed to, be the person who handles our Google Groups. It's not me either. And so I think that the beauty of this resource, of these doors, is that they're unlimited in terms of who we invite. So invite all the good people. Invite the grandparents, invite the godparents, invite them to come in. And the more you invite them, the safer the environment gets, because that's what happens when we get isolated, and these doors allow us to unisolate ourselves, to invite more people in, to get energized with the faith of somebody who's been a Catholic for 92 years, Man, they got some stories to tell, and they're willing to do that. So that's how I deal with a safe environment. Y'all come.
Great. A very specific question about Google Hangouts. Does it have a video component, or is it just a conversation through typing?
No, it can be a live video.
Great.
In other words, it would be a way, other than the number of people that are on this, Google can't handle that. That does similar to what we're doing here. In other words, when my siblings and I get together, we all see each other, we all hear each other. So if that's what the questioner is asking.
Yes, yeah, I think that hits it exactly. Yep. Someone also recommended using Screencast-O-Matic if you want to record and upload presentations. And there are, someone suggested too doing tests or quiz reviews virtually as well.
Can I piggyback on that point? Because one of the things that's neat about Google Docs is you can create a survey. So that person who just recommended, doing quizzes and stuff could use Google Docs to create a survey to do exactly that. And that's really cool. So I thank whoever gave that suggestion. That's wonderful.
There is a concern that they don't have virtual access. So I guess, obviously this is about virtual doors. Maybe are there resources that someone can go to if they feel like this is a valuable thing? How do they help their parish start to open these doors?
I think having a conversation with the pastor, the finance committee. We all have electricity in our parishes, and we're to the points where we ought to have at least Wi-Fi access in all of our facilities. And I know it's another cost, but it is part of what I think the commitment we need to. If we're going to effectively share the faith and help people become disciples in formation, then we need to clearly provide the resources and tools like that. In some places you can. If you're in the rural areas, there are grants, and I can't tell you right now specifically, but we could do some and gather some ideas on what some grants to get you started and those kinds of things. So, you know, and if what I would do is if I have access, and I know most of my students have access, I just do it. You know, start a Google Hangout on Monday night around the topic of sacraments, or throw up a Google Docs with free questions for my class. If I know I'm going to talk about reconciliation, I put a Google Docs out to say, ask your grandparents or your godparents or your parents their greatest experience around the sacrament of Eucharist, and then bring that to class. I just do it. And then sometimes you can show people that it's been effective, and that will help you then get them to take the next step and provide the materials that you need to do it. One of the things I would suggest is, and I don't know where the questioner comes from, but North Platte is a population of about 24,000 people. We have a pretty good hospital here, and I became friends with the IT guy at the hospital, and what they do is every once in a while they upgrade their hardware. And if you're friends with the IT guy, go in and say, you know, the next time you upgrade your hardware, let me know. I'd be happy to help you get rid of some of it. Because, you know, some of the stuff that we're doing, their old hardware would help us do. So
great point.
That's another way. It's another way.
Someone else recommended the Google platform of Blogger or Blogspot is another great blog resource that's easy to use.
Good point.
Christy said this is great, a lot of information packed into an hour.
Thank you.
And Tracy said great job. And Deborah's using Sadler a lot. We're pleased to hear that.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a website. How can we integrate today's information into our website? And I would say you can probably direct them to the recording of this webinar, which will be on our site, and we will follow up today's presentation with an email thanking you for joining us and directing you to our webinar page, and that's where you'll find the recording of that.
And you can, you know, one of the things you could do on your website then is put the link that they send you to the recording of this. Put that link on your website so it just sends people directly to the Sadler site.
Great, thank you. Elaine asks, what do you know about a website, cyberwise.com, that has been developed for adults' information on Internet safety and civility on the Internet?
To be honest with you, I'm not familiar with that. So.
Okay.
It's called CyberWise.
CyberWise, yes.
Okay. I'll check it out. Watch my, if you're interested in my, I'll put something about that in my Flipboard magazine.
Great. And I think that is everything. We have lots of thank yous. I think people had to go. I have put Don's email address in the chat area, so that should have come up. So certainly, it sounds like Don will answer further questions. Any last words, Don?
No, just thank you. I've enjoyed doing this, and I hope it's been helpful. So, like Christine said, if you want to email me, I'd be happy to address any questions or any insights or share any wisdom that I have.
Well, thank you so
or
much,
if you
Don.
got suggestions, send them my way too.
Thank you so much, and we're getting all the thank yous coming in. Everyone appreciated the great information. So thanks so much, Don. And everyone have a wonderful afternoon.
Yeah, for sure.